Welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my panelists for today are Morgan St. James and Dr. Karmen Smith. Our guest is Ginny Nadler, and the topic of the show is Writing with a Purpose. But before we get to my guest and my panelists, my panel would like to read a few quips and quotes. Morgan.
Oh, goody, I get to go first this time. And my quote is from Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. The cat says, "Where are you going?" Alice says, "Which way should I go?" Cat says, "Well, that depends on where you're going." Alice says, "I don't know." Cat says, "Then it doesn't matter which way you go."
I love that. Now, this one is from Dan Brown, and it says, "Nothing is more creative nor destructive than a brilliant mind with a purpose."
True. All right, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly, and my panelists are Morgan St. James and Karmen Smith. Our guest is Ginny Nadler, and the topic of the show today is Writing with a Purpose. And Dr. Karmen Smith, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your book, The I Am Solution.
Thank you, James. Yes, well, I was working for the county in Las Vegas, Nevada as a trauma specialist. So I'm a mental health therapist. I've worked with kids that have experienced trauma and their parents, which is usually how trauma starts. It starts with your upbringing. And so what I would do for the court is to interview and assess those families to see what they needed in order to move forward. And also I'm a pastor of metaphysics, so I'm a metaphysical minister. I teach at the Center for Spiritual Living. What I've discovered over the years is that spirituality is the glue and the catalyst for healing. And I'm talking about long-term healing. And to go beyond the trauma to our best self is through our spiritual work within ourselves. So that is what I talk about in the I Am Solution, transforming fear back to love.
Okay, and Morgan, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and what you've done.
Okay. For any of the regular listeners, I'm probably going to bore you to death with my long description again, since I'm such an underachiever. But I have 16 books in publication, and I write in a couple of different genres. My fun and favorite one is Funny Mysteries, and I have two series, Silver Sisters Mysteries and Revenge is Fun series. And actually, I'm excited because the audiobook on the third book in the Silver Sisters Mysteries just came out this past week. And so now we have 3 of the Silver Sisters books in audio, and the 4th one is in production with Books in Motion. The other thing that I've done is that I have helped victims, well, actually not victims, survivors of abuse write their memoirs. And the 2 books that had me connected with their feelings towards spirituality are No More Crying Angels. Bella Capo was the abused child of a crime boss, and she got to a point where, as a child, she was so traumatized by the things that happened to her that she couldn't cry. And as an adult, she had a crying angel tattooed on her left shoulder so that the angel could cry for her. And her success, and through spirituality and a great belief in God, was that she got to a point where she could cry, which was a huge success for her. The other one, Incest, Murder, and a Miracle, well, the title tells you pretty much what it's about. And the miracle was the husband who came back to life after 43 minutes of being dead in 2012. And once again, he and his wife are very steeped in spirituality. So I feel like I have a connection.
Absolutely.
How is that book doing? And I know...
Incest, Murder, and a Miracle? Yeah. It's doing fantastic. It's under option to Sony Pictures, and Cheryl and Rob Cuccio have been on multiple TV shows, including Dr. Oz and Discovery ID.
What about Dr. Phil?
No, they haven't been on Dr. Phil. But you know what? They'd probably even be a good topic for Dr. Phil, because in the 30 years that they've been together, they've gone through so much that it is amazing that they are still married and in love.
Well, and she also hired someone to hit a hitman
Oh, yes.
to kill her father.
As a 16-year-old, Cheryl hired one of her classmates to kill her father. He'd been abusing her for years and incest up to 3 times a day. And when he made moves that he was going to go after her 8-year-old sister, she'd promised her dead mother on her dying bed that she would always watch out for her sister. And as the 16-year-old, she didn't know what to do because he made it clear that the 8-year-old was his next target. And she hired a classmate to kill her father, and he did. And she did go to jail for it. Of course, she didn't go to jail for a long time because she was tried as a juvenile and as a victim.
Yeah.
What an interesting story.
And then that she knew her husband, though, during that time.
Yes.
Because they were in school together.
She met Rob when she was 15 years old. And he was the only one, despite some of the things that have been said on TV, he was the only one who knew that she was an incest victim. And he was her rock for all of those years. They got married after she got out of jail. And incidentally, the jail that she was in is the one that they use for Orange is the New Black.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And she was in an adult jail as a teenager and saw horrible things.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably only added to it.
Yeah, so when Rob died, he'd been her rock for so many years, and she wouldn't accept that he was dead. She just wouldn't let the doctors stop trying. He'd been pronounced at 30 minutes. And she wouldn't let them give up on him. And they finally said, okay, we'll give you 10 minutes more. And miraculously, he had a pulse at 8 of those 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, you also have a quarterly magazine, Writer's Tricks of the Trade.
Yes, right. Yeah. And you wrote an article for me in this issue.
In this issue.
Yeah, the winter issue of Writer's Tricks of the Trade magazine, which can be found on joomag.com, JOOMAG.com. All of the 16 issues so far are available on JUMAG. And it's a great writers magazine. It's free. And it's articles by writers for writers. And we talk about all kinds of things and helpful tips and techniques and conference listings. And, well, you'll have to check out the magazine to find out.
There you go.
Wow, thank you.
Well, our first guest is Ginny Nadler. And Ginny is the author of Spiritual Anatomy, Realigning Body and Soul, and creator of Structural Realignment Integration, which is SRI. And she draws her years as a wellness educator and body alignment specialist to support individuals with stress structures to be pain-free and rediscover freedom in movement. You're not a chiropractor. That's not the right way to say it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I'm more, I would say, of a body anthropologist.
Okay. Her works help awaken individuals to the deep integrational trauma that exists in their cell structures, and she collaborates with practitioners of other modalities seeking a deep framework for their own approach to movement, trauma, and pain management. So you do work with do you like doctors or chiropractors?
Yes, I work with medical doctors. I work with, right now I'm working with the head of pain management of a major hospital. I work with the functional medicine department in another hospital. So yes, and chiropractor is movement modality specialists of all kinds.
Okay.
Are the people I love to work with.
Well, I remember Louise Hay would talk about how there are certain illnesses and diseases and dysfunctions in our body and related it back to a spiritual lack or space that had not been developed spiritually. So when you're aligning the body and the soul, is this kind of what you're looking at also, how arthritis can be maybe an effect of some trauma or some disbelief in who they are?
Yes, most definitely. What I've learned, and it's so fascinating, the body, the structure, the spirituality. I'll just back up a teeny little bit to our embryology. And it's really the embryology of consciousness. Because when we come into a body, when mommy and daddy cells, one cell from mommy, one cell from daddy, comes and joins, and those cells start to proliferate and multiply. So the very first structure that forms in the human, that becomes the human body, is in the floor of the pelvis, called the perineum. And the perineum is in between the anus and the genitals. The very first organ that forms is the heart. But the first structure is the perineum. And when the light comes in from source, that's where the light lands, in the floor of the pelvis, in what becomes miraculously this 1-inch place, this 1-inch structure in our body. And from this place where the light lands, the light of the divine, all of us emanate. The arms, the legs, the limb buds pop out at 28 days in utero, out of this space. So this is the source of our beginning. And even in utero, the embryo can be in stress. Someone who is born into a family in an enormous amount of stress, or even a little stress, or a lot of violence, which was my situation. The fear response takes place in that perineal area, the source of our beginning. So, you know, when the dog is scared and the tail tucks under, that's what happens with us. We literally suck the pelvic floor under and squeeze this area in the pelvic floor, in the perineal area. And so when I studied embryology, after years and years and years of working with bodies and realizing that no matter where the pain was in the body, it all started in the pelvic floor, which was miraculous. So if someone has hip pain or shoulder pain or knee pain or foot pain, I can trace it back, the meridian lines, to the source of our beginnings, where the contractions start.
That's
and
fascinating.
That's why I call this spiritual anatomy. And what really is exciting is that intergenerational trauma. Mm-hmm. And we know this from studies in the last many years. For example, the Holocaust in Germany. 3 generations later, people are holding on to the trauma in their cell structure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true for almost anyone who's gone through some kind of, especially childhood trauma. You know, it's always there and it's always a part of them.
Yes, yes. And so when we look at the world that we live in today, and the racism, and the fear of, quote unquote, the stranger, the other, we are hosting thousands and thousands and thousands of years of responses in our cell structure. So when I work with someone's body, more often than not, all of these stories that are in the cell, not so much the memory of stories, and I'm really not so interested in the memory of the story, because the story may have been inherited 5 generations ago in a family lineage. I'm interested in the story coming out of the cell as energy, so that we can come back to our central meridian line, where the light came down through what becomes the spinal cord, the meridian line.
Okay. Ladies, you have any
So
questions?
Well, you were talking about the Holocaust story, and I read a little bit about that when it came out, probably about a couple of years ago. And I immediately thought about slavery and the trauma that happened within the Black culture and how that is carried on generation after generation. And people say, well, that was so long ago. That's not happening now. Things are so much better. But it's in the cell DNA. And people don't realize that we carry trauma. We also carry the miraculous heroism that happened in our generations as well. So I'm not saying that that's the only thing that travels down through the cellular structure, but I think that it's coming to the forefront, and your book certainly is helping that come to the forefront, that it is there. And it can affect us physically with the death rate of Black people and the health problems that we have can be traced DNA-wise to some of the trauma that we've experienced.
I have a question, too. As I was sitting and listening, this doesn't go back generations, but I'm thinking of Bella Capo and No More Crying Angels. And as an adult, she has had multiple physical challenges. She is almost constantly in pain. She's learned how to manage her own pain. And I was wondering if things like that also fit into what you were talking about, because her trauma started from the time she was 4 years old. And
yeah, most definitely. We hold on, and as children, and she being the enormously traumatized child and all of the abuse, as children, we are very creative and we're very smart as organisms. We are going to do the very best that we can do to protect the organism. And in the contractions, in the shutting off of energy to protect ourselves, down the line as we grow, physical conditions start to happen. My mother had heart disease. My mother's message to me and I say this in the book, at about, I don't know, I might have been between 9 and 11. And she said, Ginny, on the female line, we all die of heart disease. You too will die of heart disease. And I recall at that young age saying, I'm going to die of heart disease? And at that moment was when my light bulb went on, that I better figure this out, because this is nothing more than crazy.
Exactly.
And her crazy, which was her defense through the trauma that she experienced, she closed her heart down, and on one of her deathbeds, and she died during a bypass operation and came back afterwards. And when she came back, she was so angry when she opened her eyes, livid, the rage that she had never, ever been allowed to express during that surgery, as her her chest was being cut open. I said, what is this anger? And she said, I'm damn angry, and I will be angry to the day I die.
Wow.
And I looked at her and I said, Mom, you're not dying of something called heart disease. You are dying of a broken heart. You are dying of closing your heart down in abject terror. And one tear, and then she cut it off. I said, why did you stop? It's too scary. It's too scary. What is scary? If I feel all of this, I will... And then she couldn't finish the sentence. I said, you'll die? Yes, And I said, darling, you have already chosen death again and again and again by closing down. And in that moment, she realized. I said, maybe this lifetime you will not complete and open it all up. But as a beginning is a beginning. So to answer your question, yes. We have a whole story, many, many, many chapters where we close down, and then the arthritis and the heart disease and cancer. All the different ways that the organism prevents the energy from flowing.
Well, I have a question for you, Ginny.
Wow.
And please, Karmen and Morgan, jump in here. When you're talking about the energy of the cell and how it's passed on from generation to generation, how do you align that with reincarnation? Or is that something that you believe?
I definitely believe that the work that I do in my spiritual awakening and to bring forth that which has been lying in the shadows and do my shadow, quote unquote, shadow therapy and bringing it forth and stealing heals perhaps what has happened thousands and thousands of years ago, and certainly in my immediate lineage. And so when my soul goes on to the next place, I do believe in my coming back in a brand new story with a whole other family lineage and line, that I now have a new opportunity to live more in the fullness and majesty of what's possible, living in this divine structure again and again and again and again.
I also want to ask you something that you said. You mentioned that, like, as a child, for instance, if there's trauma in your life, how that can manifest. Like, I think Dr. Karmen mentioned it too, as far as illness goes. So how do you feel, because I know you deal with doctors, Ginny, so how do you feel with, and I'm just going to throw out a few examples here. Let's say you're a child, and let's say you have an issue. We'll just go with what I know, stomach problem. And so doctors are not necessarily as spiritual as what you're talking about. They don't look at it from that perspective. So then they'll say, well, we have this new surgery we can do, and we can do this and realign that. And because medicine is constantly changing, and sometimes even after having an experiment for 2 or 3 years, they don't know the repercussions of what will happen 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So now let's say something pops up 20 years down the road. It's not always necessarily now something that was an issue that happened in your childhood. It could have been something that was an issue done by medical interference, like a surgery, for instance, that might have been taken care of, and I know it's going to sound wacko, but kind of in a spiritual way, in the way that if you could have just tuned into your body, figured out what was going on, and maybe even through nutrition taking care of the problem, as opposed to seeking out a medical plausibility of fixing it. I mean, we wouldn't know that. You know, when we go to a doctor, we have to trust what we're being told, and we do what we're told. But I'm just giving, that's an example of what I'm saying, is that sometimes what we manifest as an adult isn't necessarily from the trauma or whatever that was from a child. It could have been from some other intervention.
From a medical reason. Or something.
Or even medication.
Yeah, medication side effects. As a cancer survivor, you know, I know that some of the medications really wreak havoc with your body, but, you know, the good thing is you're here.
Right.
And so you kind of overlook those things.
So how do you balance that? Ginny?
Yeah. I'm so blessed to be present in our current age, because more and more medical doctors are coming on board as they realize the detriment that pharmaceuticals have wreaked havoc.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I just had a friend die a year ago, a young man. When he was 32 years old, he had Hodgkin's disease. He died a year ago at 52. They pummeled him with chemo and radiation. Now, what the medical industry knows is that they are giving way too much radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And for lumpectomies and mastectomies, when that amount of radiation hits the chest, the heart and the lungs are in jeopardy.
Sure. But they're starting to do it now to
yeah.
where they localize. They try to do localization. They introduce crystals now to
Exactly.
attack the tumors so that they can just focus on those tumors. So you're right. The doctors are attuning to what you're talking about as well. They're learning that,
Yes.
you know.
Right.
They're waking up, and I work with functional medicine doctors who are completely in a different realm. Oh, you have stage 3 skin melanoma? Wait a minute. Let's take a look at the nutrition. Let's take a look at the whole body before we say, let's do surgery. One of my friends is a functional medicine doctor, and she, 2 years ago, developed a skin melanoma. She's done nothing about it. And she doesn't plan on having any surgery, and she is healthy. And so we are in a time where we have enough tools to begin to take responsibility. This is fascinating to me. I've started to work with the head of pain management at a major hospital. And she read my book and she called me and she said, I do not have a clue of what you are speaking about, not only with my own patients, but with me. So she and I met about 1.5 years ago. And she began talking with her patients. She's an anesthesiologist, so she knows drugs, and balancing and doing spinal taps and nerve blocks for pain. She said, but the truth of the matter is, a nerve block works for literally a blip. Then what do? She said, I don't have the tools. And so she has started to ask patients about the trauma in their life. And she is blown away at what she is hearing. And she called me up and she said, I need help. She said, I have no idea how to deal with this. She said, I think this is a much bigger story than lumbar pain.
Well, you know, go ahead, Ginny.
So what I am so honored and feel so blessed to be working with people who are questioning is we have a lot of information. We have medical information, which is important. I am not negating that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But now we need to take a look at the whole picture.
I think part of the problem when it comes to medical is there's so many, the human body is so complicated. I mean, there's so many issues that could be at force there. One of the things that I'll give you an example, opioids, which is a major crisis, and the government's even trying to get involved with that. I deal with an 85-year-old who I've had to I think 5 different doctors now in the last 6 years. And I remember I went to a pain management. She has back problems, and we went to a pain management specialist. Well, first of all, one doctor said, at your age, you should expect to have these problems. So just live with the pain. Then the next doctor sent her to the pain management. They put her on 4 hydrocodone a day. So now she was spaced out all day long. Then the next doctor, because you're supposed to come off of those slowly. Well, I couldn't get her in for an appointment for a month and a half, so she wasn't going to have medicine for a month and a half. So then I found one doctor, thank goodness, who's young, just out of medical school, and she studied neurology. And she started realizing there's a lot more here than what we're probably trying to look at. It's not just age-related. All right, this is going to sound strange, ladies. But anyway, so she the first thing she did is she took the hydrocodone, the opioids, and dropped it down to 2 a day because she figured you should be able to manage your pain throughout the day if you take one in the morning and one in the evening. That was the first thing, which I thought was fantastic, that she did that. The second thing is, because believe it or not, this 85-year-old was hooked on them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is we think of age as everything that happens to us as we get older is because we're old. And that isn't true. And this is, ladies, you're going to be shocked at this, but this is exactly what happened. She said, I'm going to send her out for some blood work. Now, this woman's 85 years old. Her husband died 24 years ago. She's had no partner in 24 years. She sent her out and had a syphilis test done. Did you know it came back positive?
Wow.
She sent her. She questioned her. Have you been with anyone since your husband died? No, I have not. I then started researching and found out that syphilis can be dormant in your system for 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. But when it manifests, it can start to do it on a rapid basis. Mm-hmm. So then she sent her back for another test. It came back positive. And as it turned out, she did have it, which was humiliating to her. I mean, I know people don't like to talk about this kind of thing, but sometimes it's a necessity. So what happened is that they treated her. It's a very simple thing to treat. Do you know that her back problems got better? Because what I found out was that syphilis can actually get into the spinal canal. When it gets into the spinal canal, it acts differently because now it affects the brain and the spine.
Right.
So just something as simple as that, no one wanted to treat her for or even suspect of her because of her age. What I really find fascinating,
That is fascinating.
her new doctor, we just had a talk a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about this, and I said, I want to thank you for taking the time to find out what was really wrong here. And then she said that she's done several tests since then. She always tests all her elderly patients. Mm-hmm. And the people that she graduated school with from the same medical school who also study neurology do the same thing with their elderly patients. And do you know they're finding this as a pattern?
Wow.
Well, James, what's interesting to me is that the very first published article that I had in a regular magazine was called "It's Just Old Age, or Is It?"
Yeah.
And it had to do with my mother, where her doctor she was having, some spacing memory, and she was feeling faint and
Right.
things like that. And he said, well, you have to expect that. The body breaks down. It's just old age. And she was also in her 80s at the time. And he said, it's very typical. And I said, well, it's not typical for my mother. My mother is not a typical 80-year-old.
Right.
Well, you're just going to have to go along with this and blah, blah, blah. And we took her to a gerontologist only to find out that she'd had many strokes. And then that was what was causing everything. And not only that, but they recommended moving her to assisted living because they said that she was not safe for herself at that point because of what the mini strokes had done. But you could talk to her, and she was totally articulate. She didn't look like there was anything wrong with her, and yet the mini strokes had stolen certain things from her.
Well, and you reminded me, one of the problems that she had was her memory. And that's the real thing I was trying to focus on is why is her memory going? Does she has Alzheimer's or dementia? And that's why she did those tests, because she says, before I run tests on those, I want to check something. Because she knew to do that. Because actually, syphilis does affect the brain as well. So, I think it's great that we do have doctors like Ginny said, that are a new age of doctors that are tuning into the body and issues that we don't think could possibly be there that are very simple to treat, really. Mm-hmm. They don't require surgery or,
Yeah, well, and I wanted to say one other thing, too, relative to what you were saying, Ginny, about lumpectomy and radiology or radiation and so forth. So I've been through that. And it's really important for the radiologist to not just go by what the pattern is supposed to be. You need to have a doctor who relates to your particular body and what's happening with your particular case. Because, like, I was originally prescribed 25 courses of radiation. At 17, he called me into his office and he said, "You're free. You don't need any more.
Yeah.
You know, I'm releasing you." And when they set up that radiation, they use a computer and they target the exact area that they're going to, and they create a path in order to avoid the major organs. Now, I don't know if every interventional radiologist does that, but that was what my radiologist did.
Yeah.
Well, let me
Ugh,
ask,
I would hope more and more that they would be doing that for sure.
so
yeah.
when you're working with the person at the pain center or the doctor that works with people with pain and say they're on opioids, when they call you in, how are you treating them and finding out about their trauma, and how do you treat them?
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
How am I working with their trauma?
Yes, how are you treating them? What's your
Well,
treatment?
I'm deeply working with their pain in their body. So, for example, I may have someone who has severe spinal disc problems and has already had surgery, and the surgery didn't help. In fact, it hindered. So when I am realigning, why I call my work structural realignment integration, is because in Western industrialized society, our pelvis is not in correct alignment. Very, very few people in our society can drop down into a squat when they are 60, 70, and 80 years old.
Right.
I work with 15-year-olds that no longer can drop down into a full squat sitting on their heels. And yet we all began going into squat. And what happened to us over years and years and years and years, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, is we have changed the position of the pelvis in relation to the spine and the leg. And so because of this, there are the areas at the top of the thighs where the thigh bone comes into the pelvis and where the spine comes down into the pelvis, where we have literally put ourselves in prison with our musculature. And so how I begin getting to the source of the pain is realigning, teaching the person I am working with their specific anatomy. And then once the spaces start to be made and the energy starts to flow into the base and up and down the spine, then the trauma in the cell structure is releasing.
Now, what is CoreBodyWisdom.com? What is that site about?
Core Body Wisdom is the name of my umbrella company. And so I have been a wellness educator for many, many, many years, creating wellness initiatives. And I have gone into corporations and worked on high-level wellness with companies, with employees in companies, and mostly when I lived in California in Silicon Valley. And so Core Body Wisdom is what my work is about. And I am a nutritionist also. And so my first work of awakening in my life was as an elementary school teacher in Harlem in New York.
Okay.
And that is the place where I realized, oh my, I don't think I am going to be able to teach these children in ways that I've gone to school for as a teacher. Because the trauma in their family and the lack of nutrition, starvation really, I began to awaken to this is a much bigger story. So core body wisdom, what my love is teaching and giving the tools to awaken us to the truth of who we are living in a body. Most people don't even know the majesty that we embody, that this is the home of the divine.
Yeah, well, I have a question. Go ahead, Ginny.
No, please, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm not sure what year you wrote your book, but I'm sure that there have been advances and an enhancing of things that you've learned and so forth since then. So my question is, if you've written anything else, or if you haven't, if you plan to write another book.
I just finished this book, Spiritual Anatomy, Realigning Body and Soul, and it just came out months back.
Okay.
I just had my first book release party in Cleveland, Ohio, where I developed most of this work.
Wonderful.
Yes, I do have plans to write more. I'm writing articles. I wanted the tagline of this book to be the embryology of consciousness, not realigning body and soul. And my editors jumped all over me and said, no one's picking this up for back pain. the embryology of consciousness? I said, well, that's what it is. So, yes, that's the next rendition. And I have lots of plans. What I really want to do, and this is beginning, is, for example, because of the enormous amount of violence that I grew up in my family, I destroyed my teeth. I clenched them. Since 18 years old, I was a patient at the National Institute of Health. What have you done to your mouth? And I didn't have a clue putting the trauma together with the clenching and grinding. And years and years and years later, fast forward, about 5 years ago, I go to yet another dentist, and he's appalled. What happened to you? He said, you have ground these down to nothing. And I said, no. I didn't just grind them, I ate them.
Wow.
I ate my teeth. And so this dentist, who is a fellow at a dental school here in Cleveland, at the end of my treatment, now I have gorgeous teeth, but at the end of my treatment, he said to me, tell me what happened to you. I said, 3 years later, you're asking me this? As I'm sobbing as he's drilling the teeth that's left down to little nibs so that we can cap them all. And he said, I couldn't ask you during the treatment for these 3 years because I needed to be so focused on your care. And to be honest with you, I was scared to feel what you have felt.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And he started to cry.
Mm.
And we cried in each other's arms. And he said, I had no idea. I am a technician. I am an artist. I said, so now what I'm going to have you do for me is to invite me into the dental school so I can speak about collective and personal trauma and what happens from the clenching in the floor of the pelvis to the clenching in the jaw. And he looked at me and he said, most definitely, you are going to speak to the dental school.
Well, Jenny, I want to ask you, did you write anything before this? Was there ever any books before this one?
No.
Okay. So
No.
So your real reason for writing this was to basically follow suit with core body wisdom.
Yes, and because I, over 40 plus years, discovered in my own body the unraveling of my pain, my deep sciatica. 45 years of working with students, teachers, bodies in creating structural realignment integration. I knew that I had to write this book so that people can pick it up and say, I may be 70 years old and older and in pain, but I can do something about this now.
And, I think that's part of what our show is about today when we talk about writing with a purpose is that, and actually everyone sitting here has written something with a purpose.
Yes.
And, you want to influence people, you want to motivate people or inspire people. It isn't always about the money that you're going to make. Yeah. It's mostly about the story you're going to tell.
That's absolutely so true, James. I mean, I can say that for Bella Capo with No More Crying Angels. I can say it for Cheryl and Rob Cuccio with Incest, Murder, and a Miracle. The money was not the object. Mm-hmm. They put themselves through the pain of the memories and writing the books in order to let others know that they aren't alone, and that you don't have to be defined by things that have happened to you. And both of them have received emails and Facebook messages from all over the world thanking them for sharing their story because, and this fits right in with this Me Too movement, is that so many of the people that wrote to them had repressed what happened to them because they were ashamed, they were made to feel that they were the ones at fault, and then they read the honest accounts from these three people and said, oh my God, I am not alone. Thank you so much. I can finally talk about what happened to me.
Exactly.
And the I am solution.
And I think we all have passion. And so when we write from that passion, it really touches another person's heart that we haven't even met before.
Right.
So our passions can heal the world. So what we're passionate about and what we know about what draws us spiritually to a topic can help other people. And so we need to always be cognizant that that's where writing comes into play, where we can write down these passionate thoughts and these passionate ideas, these creative thoughts, and it will touch another person and change someone else's life. So you can find the I Am Solution on Amazon.com. You can find all of our books probably on that.
Right, all of my books are on Amazon.com.
And none of mine are.
Oh, they're not.
No, I pulled everything. I pulled everything off.
I looked for yours, James, when you wrote the article for Writers' Tricks
they're
of the
out there,
Trade.
but they're not mine. I mean, they are my books, but they're used editions. I pulled all my books because the first book I ever wrote, I'm going to revamp that. It's coming back out. My next book's coming out very soon. I'll finish it up this month, actually.
Good.
I just found an illustrator today for my children's stories. And that's what I was going to say. We can find inspiration in anything we write, whether it's like what you write with Core Body Wisdom or with your books, Morgan, or the I Am Solution. I have a children's story that is very inspirational in a way. And it's called The Purple Caterpillar. And it just talks about how just because this one caterpillar is a different color from all the other caterpillars doesn't mean that he's different. He's still the same.
Right.
We look at him as different because he's purple.
Right.
And then it goes through that whole process of becoming butterflies. And this purple caterpillar they made fun of turns out to be the most beautiful caterpillar they'd ever seen. And the lesson in the end is that he's still the same. Even as this beautiful caterpillar, he was the beautiful butterfly. He was also the beautiful caterpillar. You just didn't see it the same way.
Right. You know what that reminds me of, James? When my oldest son was a child, there was a book called Borka the Goose with No Feathers. And it was the same kind of thing where all the geese made fun of this little goose that had no feathers, and they had to knit a sweater to keep it warm and things like that. And when all the geese flew south, Borka couldn't go, so she stowed away aboard a ship and went to Kew Gardens in England.
Well, I actually incorporate the caterpillars who go to find something to eat, and there's these kids from a schoolyard who see the two little caterpillars trying to cross a sidewalk, And then they debate, should we cross the sidewalk because it's so wide? Is it safe? And they decide to do it on their own anyway, even they were taught not to as caterpillars. And this little girl sees them and thinks, I will take them and make them an experiment in the science class. And this little boy named Billy, who's the bully, goes to step on him just as she reaches down to grab him. And she pushes him out of the way. And she convinces this little boy, Billy, who's a bully, that, why don't you pair up with me? We'll take both these caterpillars back to our class. We'll make it a science project, and we'll make an A. And they did. And that changed his whole perspective, and that he realized he's not as stupid as he thought. People aren't going to make fun of it anymore because all the kids enjoyed watching these caterpillars build cocoons and become these beautiful butterflies. So then the kids take the two butterflies after they've emerged from their cocoons and decide to let them go. So they let them go out in the schoolyard, and everyone's cheering Billy and Susie on. So Billy feels better about himself. That's the lesson there.
Right.
Well, then when the butterflies fly away and the little caterpillars who have now become butterflies as well see Doogie, he's the caterpillar, and Mary Kay, they go, oh, he's so beautiful. And then Mrs. Kind, who was their butterfly teacher when they were little caterpillars, calls them in for one last class. And she explains to them, this Doogie is the same caterpillar you saw when you were little. It's just you think he's this beautiful butterfly now, but he's the same beautiful person he was then.
Boy,
And
great
they have
messages.
changed.
I
They
love
changed.
it.
He didn't change.
Right. Their perspective
Yeah,
on
their
things
perspective
changed.
changed.
Because
Yes.
now they saw him as a different, but he
Right.
was the exact same.
Exactly.
I love that you have so many multiple messages in that.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
positive, all, coming across with getting away from some of the perceptions, showing through beautiful illustrations
Yeah.
what
yeah.
children can
Yeah.
learn by example.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to make it with real children and then with the little caterpillars. Because,
Yeah,
kids
I
like
love
to
that.
imagine, do they talk when they're down there?
Exactly.
So I did it. And then, I tried to incorporate little lessons like crossing the street, like, should you cross the street by
Yeah,
yourself
I
until
got
you're a
that
certain
one,
age?
yeah.
And so, that's why I worked it that way. But anyway, we all write for inspirational reasons. And even when I write my novels, believe it or not, my first one was government espionage. But there's a lot of messages in there about life if you just look for them. And I think for me as a writer, I'm always looking for angles to try and teach something,
Right.
about ourselves.
Even with my funny mysteries, there's always something in there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's little messages.
Yeah, I think all of us, our own history of growing and living, we've got messages that we want to deliver.
Yeah.
We have all of this life experience. Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time.
Oh,
So we're down to the
Oh,
last
this is
minutes of the
wonderful.
show. Yeah.
Boy,
So-
we could go on for another hour.
I know. This was really good, Jenny.
I
Thank
know.
you. Thank
This
you
is
so much.
fabulous.
So, Jenny, where can
Oh,
we
thank
find out
you.
more about your work?
well, my website is corebodiwisdom.com, and anyone can go on there and actually download and excerpt the first chapter of the book, Spiritual Anatomy.
Okay.
And where I teach workshops, and I also have a DVD that I did, and you can look on that website and download YouTube sections actually of me working with bodies, so you can see the work. And yes, and the book is on Amazon.
Wonderful.
All right. And Morgan?
Yeah, all of my books are on Amazon and on just about every online bookseller. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just pop my name into the search engine because then the majority of my books will come up.
Uh-huh.
And that's about it, I guess. My website is Morgan St. James, morganstjames-author.com. And you'll find all kinds of information there. Probably more than you ever wanted to know.
And for you?
And for me, you can go to YouTube and enter Dr. Karmen Smith. That's K-A-R instead of C-A-R. Karmen Smith. And you'll see all of my YouTube videos, which are 1-minute reminders usually, of how you can remember that you are divine, because in this culture, sometimes we forget and you need a reminder. So go to my YouTube channel, my Facebook, and also Twitter, Dr. Karmen Smith. And don't forget the website, drkarmen.com. And that's Karmen with a K.
All right, Ginny, thank you so much. And just so you know, you can find this show. It's on amfm247.com. If you go to the Aspects of Writing website at aspectsofwriting.com, all of our links are there. We're also on Blog Talk Radio on Sundays at 9 o'clock. We're on AMFM 24/7 Live on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So just go to the Aspects of Writing website, check for all of our listings. And until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
James.
you.
Thank you.